The morning sun cast long shadows across the elite military training facility as Marcus Wheeler stepped out of his weathered pickup truck. At 52, his graying beard and weathered hands told stories of countless battles fought in distant lands. The younger soldiers nearby barely glanced his way, their attention focused on the sleek sniper rifles they were assembling with practiced precision. Marcus had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq, earning medals that now sat forgotten in a dusty box at home. But those days felt like a lifetime ago. Now he worked as a groundskeeper at the local veterans hospital, a quiet job that helped him find peace after the chaos of war. The only reason he was here today was because of a special invitation from Colonel Harrison, his old commanding officer. Wheeler. The colonel's voice boomed across the training ground. "Glad you could make it, old friend." Marcus smiled and shook the colonel's hand. They had fought side by side in some of the most dangerous missions imaginable. Harrison had always respected Marcus's unique skills, even when others questioned his unconventional methods. "So these are the famous Ghost Unit snipers I've heard so much about," Marcus said, nodding toward the group of elite marksmen who were setting up their equipment. The Ghost Unit was legendary in military circles. Each member could hit targets at distances that seemed impossible. They used the most advanced rifles money could buy, equipped with computer-assisted scopes and environmental sensors that could calculate wind speed, humidity, and bullet drop with mathematical precision. Sergeant Rick Thompson, the unit's leader, noticed Marcus's simple canvas bag and raised an eyebrow. "What's in the bag, old-timer? Got yourself a nice hunting rifle?" Marcus chuckled softly. "Something like that." When Marcus opened his bag, the Ghost Unit members couldn't hide their amusement. Inside was a traditional recurve bow, handcrafted from yew wood along with a quiver of carbon arrows. The bow looked ancient compared to their high-tech equipment. "You've got to be kidding me," laughed Private Jenkins, a young sniper known for his cocky attitude. "What are you planning to do with that museum piece? Hunt rabbits?" The other soldiers joined in the laughter. To them, Marcus looked like a relic from the past, clinging to outdated methods while they represented the future of precision shooting. Their rifles could hit targets over a mile away with computer assistance. What could an old bow possibly do against that kind of technology? "I heard you were some kind of legend back in your day," Thompson said with a smirk. "But this isn't medieval times, Pops. We're talking about modern warfare here." Marcus remained calm, his weathered face showing no sign of anger or embarrassment. He had heard similar comments many times before. Throughout his military career, he had always carried his bow alongside his standard-issue rifle. While other soldiers relied entirely on their firearms, Marcus had discovered that sometimes the silent flight of an arrow could accomplish what a loud gunshot could not. "Mind if I ask how you gentlemen typically perform?" Marcus asked politely. "Our worst shooter can hit a man-sized target at 800 meters, Jenkins boasted. "Our best can reach out to 1,200 meters in perfect conditions. Thompson here holds the unit record at 1,300 meters. The soldiers continued setting up their rifles, each one worth more than most people's cars. They had laser rangefinders, ballistic computers, and scopes that could magnify distant targets until they looked close enough to touch. Everything was calculated, measured, and precise. Colonel Harrison watched the interaction with interest. He remembered Marcus's unique abilities from their time in combat. There had been situations where Marcus's bow had saved their lives, taking out enemy sentries without alerting nearby forces. But he also understood why the younger soldiers were skeptical. In an age of technology, Marcus's methods seemed primitive. "Tell you what," Thompson said, apparently feeling generous. "Since the colonel invited you, why don't you show us what that antique can do?" "We're about to run some practice drills." Marcus nodded agreeably. "I'd be honored to observe your training. Maybe I'll learn something new." The Ghost Unit set up their first drill at 400 meters. One by one, they took their shots, each bullet finding its mark with impressive accuracy. Their movements were fluid and professional, the result of countless hours of training and natural talent. "Not bad for beginners," Marcus said with a slight smile, which earned him more chuckles from the group. As the morning progressed, the soldiers moved to longer distances. At 600 meters, their shots remained tight and precise. At 800 meters, they still performed admirably, though the groups spread out slightly. These were undeniably skilled marksmen, among the best the military had to offer. Marcus spent the time studying the wind patterns, watching how the grass moved in the distance, and observing the way heat shimmer affected visibility. Old habits die hard, and his trained eye automatically cataloged every environmental factor that could affect a long-range shot. "Your turn, Grandpa," Jenkins called out during a break. "Let's see what Robin Hood can do." Marcus looked at the targets they had been shooting at, then shook his head. "Those are a bit close for a proper demonstration." The statement caused an eruption of laughter from the ghost unit. Close? They had been shooting at distances that would challenge most marksmen, and this old man with his wooden bow thought they were too close. "All right, I'll bite," Thompson said. "What distance do you need for your proper demonstration?" Marcus scanned the training range, his experienced eye picking out landmarks and calculating distances. Far in the distance, almost at the edge of the range, stood a collection of old vehicle hulks used for advanced training scenarios. "How about we try something around 2,000 meters?" Marcus suggested casually. The laughter stopped abruptly. 2,000 meters was beyond the effective range of most sniper rifles, even with perfect conditions. It was certainly far beyond anything a traditional bow could hope to achieve. "That's impossible," Jenkins said flatly. "Even our rifles would struggle at that distance." Marcus simply smiled and began stringing his bow, the familiar weight of the weapon comfortable in his hands after so many years. He had carried this same bow through multiple deployments, and it had never failed him when it mattered most. The Ghost Unit members exchanged glances, unsure whether to continue laughing or to take the old veteran seriously. What they didn't know was that Marcus Wheeler had spent decades perfecting techniques that most people believed were impossible, and he was about to prove that sometimes the old ways still had their place in the modern world. As Marcus carefully inspected his bowstring, his mind drifted back to a dusty hillside in Afghanistan 15 years earlier. He had been part of a reconnaissance team tasked with gathering intelligence on a Taliban compound. The mission had gone sideways when their position was compromised, and they found themselves pinned down by enemy fire. The memory was as clear as if it had happened yesterday. His squad was trapped behind a rocky outcrop while insurgents moved to flank their position. Standard protocol would have been to call for air support, but the enemy was too close to friendly forces. Any explosive ordnance would have wiped out both sides. That's when Marcus had done something that would become legendary among those who witnessed it. With enemy fighters advancing at over 900 meters, he had calmly strung his bow and began sending arrows downrange. One by one, the advancing fighters dropped silently, their companions unaware of what was happening until it was too late. "Impossible range for a bow," his spotter had whispered in amazement, as Marcus released arrow after arrow with mechanical precision. "Tell that to the English." "Longbowman at Agincourt," Marcus had replied, never taking his eyes off his targets. Sometimes old school is the best school. The technique he used had taken him decades to master. It wasn't just about strength or accuracy, though both were crucial. It was about understanding physics in a way that most people never bothered to learn. Traditional archery at extreme ranges required an intuitive grasp of trajectory, wind drift, and arrow flight that no computer could calculate. Back in the present, Colonel Harrison approached as Marcus continued his pre-shot routine. "You don't have to prove anything to these kids, Marcus. We both know what you're capable of." "It's not about proving anything," Marcus replied, testing the pull weight of his bow. "It's about education. These young soldiers are incredibly skilled, but they've never learned to think outside their technological comfort zone." The Ghost Unit members had gathered around, their earlier amusement replaced by curiosity. Even the most skeptical among them recognized that Marcus was approaching this challenge with the methodical preparation of a true professional. Sergeant Thompson checked his rangefinder and confirmed the distance to the target Marcus had selected. 200 meters exactly. That's well beyond effective sniper range even for us. "What's your plan here, old-timer?" Jenkins asked, though his tone had lost some of its earlier mockery. "Even if you could somehow get an arrow to travel that far, how would you possibly aim it?" Marcus pointed to a weather station mounted on a nearby tower. "Wind speed is currently 8 knots from the southwest. Humidity is low, temperature is rising, which means increasing thermals, all factors that affect arrow flight." The soldiers watched as Marcus continued his environmental assessment. He picked up a handful of dust and released it, watching how it drifted. He observed the movement of grass at various distances. Most remarkably, he seemed to be calculating complex mathematical equations in his head. "In Afghanistan, I once made a shot at 1,250 meters," Marcus said conversationally. Saved my entire squad from an ambush. The enemy never heard the arrow coming, never knew where it came from. Private Rodriguez, the youngest member of the Ghost Unit, looked intrigued. How is that even possible? Our ballistic computers can barely calculate wind drift at that distance. Your computers are thinking in straight lines, Marcus explained. They calculate the shortest path from point A to point B, but an arrow doesn't travel in a straight line at extreme distances. It follows a parabolic arc that can actually use environmental factors to your advantage. Marcus demonstrated by drawing his bow and pointing it skyward at what seemed like an impossibly high angle. At this distance, I'm not aiming at the target. I'm aiming at a point in the sky where I calculate the arrow will reach maximum altitude before beginning its descent. The concept was fascinating to the soldiers. They had been trained to use technology to overcome environmental challenges, but Marcus was describing a method that worked with those challenges instead of against them. The key is understanding that at extreme range, an arrow can actually ride thermal currents, Marcus continued. Rising hot air can extend range significantly if you know how to use it. Cold air can push an arrow down faster than gravity alone. Colonel Harrison smiled as he watched his old friend share knowledge that wasn't written in any manual. Marcus had developed these techniques through trial and error over countless missions, refining his understanding with each shot. I started learning this technique from an old Korean War veteran when I was just a kid, Marcus said. He told me that technology is useful, but understanding the fundamentals will never become obsolete. The Ghost Unit members found themselves genuinely interested despite their initial skepticism. They were learning about principles of ballistics and environmental factors that their advanced training had never covered. But even if you understand all that theory, Thompson pointed out, how do you actually hit a specific target? We can barely see that vehicle hulk with our scopes. Marcus reached into his bag and pulled out a small pair of binoculars, old and well-worn, but obviously well-maintained. First, you identify your target precisely. That burnt-out truck has a distinct silhouette. I'm aiming for the gap where the driver's side window used to be. Through his binoculars, Marcus studied the target with the intensity of a scientist examining a specimen. He noted the angle of the vehicle, the way shadows fell across its surface, and how heat shimmer affected visibility. The human eye, properly trained, can actually be more effective than electronic scopes at extreme range, Marcus explained. Scopes magnify everything, including atmospheric distortion. Sometimes less magnification with better understanding gives superior results. As Marcus continued his preparation, sharing decades of hard-won knowledge, the Ghost Unit soldiers began to realize they were witnessing something special. This wasn't just an old man trying to relive past glories. This was a master craftsman, demonstrating techniques that represented a lifetime of dedication to his art. In my experience, Marcus said, selecting an arrow from his quiver, the most important factor in any long-range shot isn't the equipment, it's patience. You wait for the right moment when all the environmental factors align in your favor. The wind had shifted slightly, now coming more directly from the west. Marcus tested it again with another handful of dust, nodding with satisfaction. Perfect. The wind is going to help carry this arrow exactly where it needs to go. The soldiers watched in fascination as Marcus took his shooting stance. There was nothing flashy about his technique, but everything about his posture and movement spoke of absolute confidence built through decades of practice. Marcus drew the bowstring back with a smooth, practiced motion that spoke of decades of muscle memory. The Ghost Unit soldiers watched in silence, their earlier mockery completely forgotten as they witnessed the methodical precision of a true master at work. The beauty of traditional archery at extreme range, Marcus said softly, holding the string at full draw without visible strain, is that it forces you to become one with the environment rather than fighting against it. Private Rodriguez pulled out his smartphone and activated a ballistic calculator app. According to this, an arrow would need to leave the bow at over 400 feet per second to reach that distance, and even then it would drop more than 200 feet. Marcus smiled without breaking his shooting stance. Your app is calculating for a direct trajectory, but watch what happens when we think three-dimensionally. He adjusted his aim point to what looked like an impossibly high angle, the arrow pointing toward a spot in the sky that seemed to have nothing to do with the distant target. To the watching soldiers, it appeared as though he was aiming at the clouds. At this angle, the arrow will reach an apex of approximately 300 feet above ground level, Marcus explained, his voice calm and steady despite holding the bow at full draw. At that height, it will catch the thermal currents created by the warming ground below. Sergeant Thompson shook his head in disbelief. Even if that's true, how could you possibly calculate the wind drift over such a long flight time? The arrow will be in the air for almost 30 seconds. Because I'm not fighting the wind, Marcus replied. I'm using it as part of the trajectory. The southwest wind will push the arrow initially, but as it rises and the air currents change, that same wind will help guide it back toward the target. The concept was revolutionary to soldiers trained to view environmental factors as obstacles to overcome rather than tools to utilize. Their high-tech scopes and ballistic computers were designed to eliminate variables, while Marcus was incorporating them into his shooting system. Colonel Harrison watched with pride as his old friend demonstrated skills that couldn't be taught in any classroom. Marcus spent 2 years studying. With a traditional Japanese archer after his first deployment, he told the Ghost unit. The man was 80 years old and could hit targets at distances most people consider mythical. The Japanese master taught me that every shot is actually 3 shots, Marcus continued, still maintaining his draw. The physical shot, the mental shot, and the spiritual shot. All 3 must align for success at extreme range. The soldiers found themselves completely absorbed in this lesson that was unlike anything in their military training. They had learned to rely on technology and mathematical precision, but Marcus was describing an approach that combined science with intuition. The physical shot is what you can measure, Marcus explained. Draw weight, arrow spine, fletching configuration. My bow pulls 68 pounds and this arrow is precisely matched to that weight and my draw length. Private Jenkins, who had been most skeptical, found himself taking notes on his phone. What about the mental shot? The mental shot is reading the environment correctly, understanding that the wind at ground level is different from the wind at 100 feet, which is different from the wind at 200 feet, learning to see thermal columns rising from warm surfaces. Marcus paused, his eyes scanning the distant target area one final time. The heat shimmer had intensified as the morning sun climbed higher, creating visible distortion patterns that most people would see as obstacles, but that Marcus read like a roadmap. And the spiritual shot? Rodriguez asked, genuinely curious. The spiritual shot is trusting your training and releasing without doubt. It's the hardest part because it requires absolute confidence in everything you've calculated, even when logic tells you the shot is impossible. The Ghost unit members realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. This wasn't just about archery. It was about a completely different philosophy of marksmanship that combined technical knowledge with intuitive understanding. I can see you're all wondering about the physics, Marcus said, reading their expressions. An arrow at extreme range doesn't behave like a bullet. It's lighter, more affected by air currents, but that's actually an advantage if you understand how to use it. He explained how the arrow's fletching would cause it to spin and stabilize during the initial phase of flight. As it reached maximum altitude, the reduced air density would allow it to maintain more velocity than calculation suggested. During the descent phase, gravity would accelerate the arrow while air currents guided its path. The key is that I'm not trying to overcome physics, Marcus said. I'm working with natural forces to guide the arrow to its target. It's like sailing versus powerboating. A powerboat fights against wind and waves, but a skilled sailor uses those same forces to go faster than the wind itself. Thompson checked his watch. You've been at full draw for almost 5 minutes. How is that even possible? Practice, Marcus replied simply. I can hold this draw for 20 minutes if necessary. But more importantly, I'm waiting for the right moment. See that heat shimmer pattern about halfway to the target? It's indicating an updraft that occurs in cycles. I need to time my release for when that thermal column is at maximum strength. The soldiers followed his gaze and began to see what he was describing. The air above the sun-heated ground was indeed moving in visible patterns, creating thermal columns that rose and fell with predictable timing. There, Marcus said softly, and released the arrow. The string snapped forward with a sharp twang that echoed across the range. The arrow leaped from the bow with surprising speed, its initial trajectory carrying it high into the morning sky. To the watching soldiers, it seemed to hang in the air for an impossibly long time as it arced toward the distant target. Flight time will be approximately 28 seconds, Marcus said calmly, lowering his bow. The arrow will reach maximum altitude at the 15-second mark, then begin its descent phase. The Ghost unit members found themselves holding their breath as they watched the tiny speck of the arrow disappear against the blue sky. Even with their advanced optics, they lost sight of it during the middle phase of its flight. This is incredible, Rodriguez whispered. I can't even see it anymore. That's normal, Marcus replied. At maximum altitude, the arrow is moving relatively slowly and is very difficult to track visually. But it's still following the path we calculated. Colonel Harrison raised his binoculars and focused on the distant target. 20 seconds, he announced, continuing the countdown that had become unconsciously important to everyone present. The soldiers realized they were witnessing something that would change their understanding of what was possible in the field of marksmanship. Whether the arrow hit its target or not, they had already learned lessons that no amount of technology could teach. 25 seconds, Colonel Harrison announced, his binoculars trained on the distant vehicle hulk. The entire training ground had fallen silent except for the gentle whisper of wind through the grass. The Ghost Unit soldiers stood motionless, their eyes straining to catch sight of the arrow as it completed its impossible journey. Even the most skeptical among them found themselves hoping to witness something extraordinary. 28 seconds. The colonel continued, and then paused. Through his binoculars he could see the target clearly, but there was no sign of impact. For a moment doubt crept into his voice. I don't see... Then it happened. A metallic clang echoed across the range, the sound carrying clearly in the still morning air. Through the binoculars, Colonel Harrison watched as a carbon arrow shaft protruded from the exact center of what had once been the driver's side window of the burnt-out truck. Target hit, he announced quietly, his voice filled with amazement. Dead center of the window opening. The silence that followed was profound. The Ghost Unit soldiers, who moments before had been laughing at Marcus's ancient equipment, now stood in stunned disbelief. They had just witnessed something that challenged everything they thought they knew about the limits of projectile weapons. Private Jenkins was the first to speak. That's impossible. The ballistics don't work. An arrow can't... His voice trailed off as the reality of what had just happened sank in. Marcus Wheeler, a 52-year-old veteran with a homemade bow, had just accomplished something that their advanced rifles and computer-assisted scopes couldn't match. Distance confirmed at 2,100 meters, Sergeant Thompson said, his laser rangefinder providing undeniable proof. I've never seen anything like that in my entire career. Marcus calmly unstrung his bow, his expression showing no surprise or celebration. To him, this was simply the result of decades of practice and understanding. The arrow will have penetrated approximately 6 inches into the metal, he said matter-of-factly. Carbon fiber holds up well at impact, even after such a long flight. Private Rodriguez pulled out his phone and began frantically searching for information about long-range archery records. The official world record for longest accurate shot with a bow is 500 meters, he announced. You just exceeded that by over 1,600 meters. Official records don't account for combat applications, Marcus replied with a slight smile. When your life depends on making the shot, you find ways to push beyond what most people consider possible. The implications of what they had witnessed began to dawn on the soldiers. In an age where electronic warfare could disable GPS systems and jam communications, Marcus had just demonstrated a completely analog skill that no amount of technology could counter. How long did it take you to develop this ability? Thompson asked, his earlier arrogance completely gone. About 30 years of constant practice, Marcus answered honestly. I started learning traditional archery as a teenager, but it wasn't until my 3rd deployment that I realized its tactical applications. Every mission after that, I spent my free time extending my effective range. Colonel Harrison lowered his binoculars and shook his head in amazement. Marcus never mentioned he'd gotten this good. Last time I saw him shoot was 15 years ago, and he was impressive then, but this... Practice doesn't stop just because you leave the service, Marcus said. I've got a 200-acre farm with plenty of room for long-range practice. My neighbors think I'm crazy, shooting arrows at hay bales half a mile away. The Ghost Unit members began to understand that they had just met someone who represented a different evolution of military marksmanship. While they had focused on technological advancement, Marcus had pushed human capability to its absolute limits. What kind of training would it take for us to learn even basic versions of this technique? Jenkins asked, his skepticism completely replaced by genuine interest. Marcus considered the question seriously. For soldiers with your existing marksmanship skills, probably 2 years of intensive practice to achieve reliable accuracy at 1,000 meters. 5 years to approach what you just saw, but why? Rodriguez asked. Our rifles can reach those distances too, and they're easier to use. Because your rifles make noise, Marcus explained. They create muzzle flash. They require ammunition that adds weight to your load, and most importantly, they depend on technology that can fail or be detected. The soldiers began to appreciate the tactical advantages of Marcus's approach. In special operations, stealth was often more valuable than raw firepower. An enemy that never knew they were under attack couldn't respond or call for reinforcements. During one mission in Iraq, Marcus continued, we needed to eliminate 3 sentries guarding a compound. They were positioned too far apart for simultaneous sniper shots, and any gunfire would have alerted the entire base. He paused, remembering the tension of that night. I took all 3 with arrows from over 800 meters. Silent, invisible, and the enemy never realized they were under attack until it was too late. Sergeant Thompson realized he was looking at a living legend. How many confirmed kills do you have with the bow? Marcus's expression grew serious. Enough to know that taking a life should never be done lightly, regardless of the weapon used. The bow isn't just a tool. It requires you to be fully present and intentional with every shot. The Ghost Unit soldiers fell quiet, recognizing the weight of experience behind Marcus's words. They had been focused on the technical achievement of the shot, but Marcus was reminding them of the human cost of their profession. The military is moving toward more automated systems, Colonel Harrison observed. Drones, guided missiles, smart weapons. But what you've just demonstrated is purely human skill. And that's exactly why it's valuable, Marcus replied. Technology can be hacked, jammed, or simply fail. But knowledge and skill, once learned, become part of you. They can't be taken away or disabled by enemy action. Private Jenkins looked toward the distant target, still processing what he had witnessed. Could you teach us? I mean, not to your level, obviously, but enough to be useful in the field. Marcus smiled at the young soldier's enthusiasm. Traditional archery isn't something you can learn in a weekend course. It requires patience, humility, and acceptance that you'll miss far more often than you hit, especially in the beginning. But you'd be willing to try? Thompson asked. If your commanding officers approve, I'd be honored to share what I've learned, Marcus replied. But understand that this isn't about replacing your current skills. It's about adding another tool to your capabilities. The morning sun had climbed higher, and the heat shimmer patterns that Marcus had used to guide his shot were becoming more pronounced. The demonstration was over, but its impact would be felt for years to come. As the soldiers began packing their equipment, they moved with a new sense of respect for the quiet veteran who had just redefined their understanding of what was possible in their chosen profession. The ride back to the main base was unusually quiet. The Ghost Unit soldiers, who had arrived that morning full of confidence and swagger, now found themselves deep in contemplation. Their high-tech rifles and advanced equipment suddenly felt less impressive after witnessing what human skill alone could accomplish. Sergeant Thompson broke the silence first. I've been a sniper for 8 years, and I thought I understood the limits of marksmanship. What we saw today changes everything. Private Jenkins, who had been most vocal in his mockery of Marcus, stared out the window of the transport vehicle. I can't stop thinking about that shot. 2,100 meters with a wooden bow. How do you even process something like that? Maybe that's the point, Private Rodriguez suggested. We've gotten so used to relying on technology that we forgot about developing ourselves. Back at the range, Marcus was helping Colonel Harrison pack up the demonstration equipment. The arrow shaft was still visible in the distant target, a testament to the morning's extraordinary events. You know this is going to change how these soldiers approach their training, the colonel said. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. That was never my intention. I just wanted to share some hard-learned lessons, but if it makes them better soldiers, then something good came from today. How did you know you could make that shot? Harrison asked. I mean, were you certain or was there doubt? Marcus smiled at his old friend's question. There's always doubt, James. But doubt and uncertainty aren't the same thing. I was uncertain about wind conditions and thermal patterns, but I wasn't doubtful about my ability to read them correctly. The distinction was important. Uncertainty acknowledged variables beyond one's control, while doubt questioned one's own capabilities. Marcus had learned to live with uncertainty while maintaining confidence in his skills. The young soldiers today, they're incredibly talented, Marcus continued. Their technical skills are far superior to what we had in our day. but they've been taught that technology eliminates uncertainty, which isn't true. Colonel Harrison understood immediately. They trust their equipment more than they trust themselves. Exactly. And when that equipment fails or isn't available, they're left without the fundamental skills needed to adapt. Meanwhile, word of the morning's demonstration had spread rapidly through the base. Other units began arriving at the range, hoping to see evidence of the impossible shot. The arrow embedded in the distant vehicle became an impromptu pilgrimage site for curious soldiers. Master Sergeant Patricia Williams, a veteran instructor with 20 years of experience, drove out to examine the target personally. Using a laser rangefinder, she confirmed the distance and took photographs of the arrow placement. The precision was undeniable. "I've heard stories about this kind of shooting," she told her companion, "but I never believed them. This changes my understanding of what human beings are capable of achieving." Back at the Ghost Unit barracks, the team was having an intense discussion about the implications of what they had witnessed. Their conversation attracted other soldiers, creating an impromptu gathering in the common area. "The thing that gets me," Jenkins said, "is how calm he was about the whole thing. Like it was just another day at the office." "That's what true mastery looks like," suggested Corporal Davis from another unit. "When you've practiced something for decades, the extraordinary becomes routine." Sergeant Thompson had been researching traditional archery on his laptop. "I found some information about historical long-range archery. Apparently, English longbowmen regularly shot at distances we'd consider extreme even today. But they weren't hitting specific targets," Rodriguez pointed out. "They were using volume fire against large formations, which makes what Mr. Wheeler did even more impressive," Thompson replied. "He wasn't just achieving distance. He was achieving precision at that distance." The discussion continued late into the evening, with soldiers sharing stories of other times they had encountered skills that seemed impossible by modern standards. The theme that emerged was consistent. Human potential often exceeded what technology suggested was achievable. The next morning, Marcus received a phone call from Colonel Harrison. "Marcus, I hope you're prepared for some attention. Word about your demonstration has reached Division Command. They want to know if you'd be willing to conduct training seminars." Marcus sipped his coffee and considered the request. What kind of training are they thinking about? Not necessarily archery specifically, but the principles you demonstrated. Reading environmental conditions, developing intuitive understanding of ballistics, building confidence in human capability over technological dependence. It was an intriguing proposition. Marcus had spent his post-military years quietly, content with his simple life. But the idea of helping young soldiers develop skills that might save their lives held strong appeal. "I'd need to think about it," Marcus replied. "Teaching what I do isn't just about technique. It's about changing how people think about their relationship with their environment." "That's exactly why they want you," Harrison said. "These soldiers are incredibly capable, but they've lost some fundamental skills that previous generations took for granted." Marcus walked outside and looked across his property, where targets were positioned at various distances out to 2,500 meters. He had been practicing alone for so many years that the idea of sharing his knowledge with others felt both exciting and daunting. His phone rang again. This time it was Sergeant Thompson. "Mr. Wheeler, I hope I'm not bothering you, but the team has been talking and we'd like to ask if you'd consider giving us some basic instruction. We understand it would take years to reach your level, but we'd like to learn the fundamentals." The enthusiasm in the young soldier's voice was unmistakable. These elite marksmen who had been laughing at his museum piece just 24 hours earlier were now asking to become his students. "I appreciate the interest, Sergeant. But you should understand that traditional archery requires unlearning some habits that modern shooting has taught you. It's not just about adding a new skill. It's about changing your entire approach to marksmanship." "We're willing to do whatever it takes," Thompson replied. "What we saw yesterday opened our eyes to possibilities we never knew existed." Marcus found himself smiling at the young man's determination. Perhaps it was time to pass on knowledge that had taken him a lifetime to acquire. The skills he had developed through decades of practice and combat experience could benefit a new generation of soldiers. "Tell you what," Marcus said finally, "if your command approves it, I'll work with your unit for a month. But we start with the basics. No shortcuts, no quick fixes. Just fundamental skills and patience." "Yes, sir," Thompson replied enthusiastically. "We'll make whatever arrangements are necessary." As Marcus hung up the phone, he realized that his quiet retirement was about to become much more interesting. But more importantly, he had the opportunity to ensure that valuable skills wouldn't be lost to future generations of warriors. 6 months after that remarkable demonstration, the training range looked completely different. Where once only high-tech sniper rifles had dominated the firing line, now wooden targets stood at various distances, and the sound of bowstrings mixed with the crack of gunfire. Marcus Wheeler had become something of a legend throughout the military training command. His month of instruction with the Ghost Unit had expanded into a permanent program that attracted soldiers from across the country. The quiet veteran found himself busier than he had been during his active duty years. The Ghost Unit soldiers had progressed remarkably under Marcus's patient instruction. While none had achieved his extraordinary range, they had all become proficient at distances that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. More importantly, they had developed a deeper understanding of marksmanship that improved their performance with conventional weapons as well. Sergeant Thompson, now Marcus's most dedicated student, could reliably hit targets at 800 meters with his bow. The young soldier had embraced the philosophy of working with environmental conditions rather than fighting against them, and his improvement with traditional rifles had been equally dramatic. The thing about learning from Marcus, Thompson explained to a group of visiting officers, is that he doesn't just teach you to shoot. He teaches you to see the world differently. Private Jenkins, once the most skeptical member of the unit, had become fascinated with the historical aspects of traditional archery. He had researched ancient techniques and even traveled to England to study medieval longbow methods during his leave time. "I used to think that newer automatically meant better," Jenkins admitted during one training session. But Marcus showed us that human skill developed over centuries doesn't become obsolete just because we have computers. The success of the program had attracted attention from unexpected quarters. Military historians wanted to document Marcus's techniques. Sports archery organizations sought his advice for improving long-range competition methods. Even civilian law enforcement agencies expressed interest in silent, long-range capabilities, but Marcus remained focused on his primary mission, ensuring that fundamental skills weren't lost to future generations of warriors. He had developed a curriculum that combined traditional archery with lessons in environmental awareness, mental discipline, and self-reliance. Technology is a tool, Marcus would tell each new group of students, but tools break, run out of power, or become unavailable. Your mind, your training, and your understanding of natural principles will never fail you. The training program had also attracted international attention. Military delegations from allied nations came to observe and learn. The idea that ancient skills could enhance modern military effectiveness resonated with soldiers worldwide who had experienced the limitations of overdependence on technology. During one memorable visit, a group of Special Forces operators from 3 different countries spent a week learning Marcus's methods. The cultural exchange was as valuable as the technical instruction, as soldiers shared different approaches to marksmanship and environmental awareness. "What Marcus has created here," observed Colonel Harrison, now promoted to Brigadier General, "is more than just archery training. It's a philosophy of human potential that applies to every aspect of military service." The program's success had also led to research partnerships with military academies. Students studying ballistics and physics came to observe how Marcus achieved results that their calculations suggested were impossible. His intuitive understanding of complex environmental interactions provided insights that enhanced academic understanding of projectile flight. Private Rodriguez, now a sergeant himself, had become Marcus's assistant instructor. His analytical mind helped bridge the gap between Marcus's intuitive methods and the structured learning style that younger soldiers expected. "The hardest part," Rodriguez explained to new students, "isn't learning to shoot the bow. It's learning to trust your own observations over what machines tell you." As word of the program spread, Marcus received invitations to speak at military conferences and training symposiums. His message was always the same: human capability, properly developed, could exceed what technology alone could achieve. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. A letter arrived from Afghanistan, written by a young soldier whose unit had used modified versions of Marcus's environmental awareness techniques during a difficult mission. Your methods saved our lives, the letter read. When our GPS failed and communications were jammed, we navigated using natural landmarks and wind patterns the way you taught us. We completed our mission and all came home safely. Marcus kept that letter in his desk drawer, a reminder that his work had real-world impact beyond the training range. The Ghost Unit, meanwhile, had become the most requested special operations team in their division. Their enhanced skills in environmental reading and adaptive marksmanship made them exceptionally effective in challenging conditions where other units struggled. "We're still the same soldiers we always were," Thompson explained to a reporter documenting the program's success. "But now we have tools and understanding that make us better at everything we do." The program had evolved beyond its original scope. Students learned meditation techniques for maintaining calm under pressure, studied weather patterns and their effects on long-range shooting, and practiced equipment-free navigation methods that had served warriors for millennia. As the first anniversary of his famous 2,100-meter shot approached, Marcus reflected on how much had changed. His quiet retirement had become a mission to preserve and pass on knowledge that might otherwise have been lost. The arrow shaft still protruded from the distant vehicle hulk, now protected by a small shelter that preserved it as a monument to human achievement. New students often made the pilgrimage to see it, drawing inspiration from physical proof that the impossible could become possible through dedication and skill. Every master was once a disaster. Marcus would tell discouraged students struggling with their first attempts at long-range archery. The difference between success and failure isn't talent. It's persistence and willingness to learn from every mistake. Looking toward the future, Marcus had begun training a cadre of instructors who could carry on his methods when he eventually retired for real. The knowledge he had spent a lifetime accumulating would live on through dedicated teachers committed to preserving these essential skills. "What we're really teaching," Marcus told his instructor candidates, "isn't archery. It's confidence in human potential. In a world that increasingly relies on automation, we're proving that people can achieve extraordinary things through understanding, practice, and respect for natural principles." The legacy of that single impossible shot continued to ripple outward, inspiring soldiers around the world to push beyond perceived limitations and rediscover the extraordinary capabilities that lay dormant within human potential. Marcus Wheeler had silenced the laughter of elite snipers not just with his incredible accuracy, but with a demonstration of what dedication and wisdom could achieve.